Emma, honey, we've talked about this. The business needs someone with a certain aptitude. Your brother just has a better head for these things. I stared at my father across his mahogany desk, the same desk where I'd spent countless childhood afternoons watching him work, dreaming of the day I'd sit on the other side. The family portrait on the wall seemed to mock me now. Mom, Dad, golden boy David, and me. All smiles. All lies. But I have an MBA. David barely finished his bachelor's. I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. I've been working in the company since I was 16. My father sighed, that patronizing sound I'd grown to hate. Education isn't everything, Emma. David has instinct. He understands what Callaway Construction needs. Behind him, my brother leaned against the credenza, arms crossed, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. He didn't even try to hide his satisfaction. Dad's right, Em. You're just not cut out for this. Maybe stick to the HR department? You're good with people. The condescension in his voice made my stomach turn. I looked from my father to my brother, then to my mother, who sat quietly in the corner, eyes downcast. She wouldn't meet my gaze. She never did when it mattered. This isn't fair, I said, hating how childish the words sounded the moment they left my mouth. David chuckled. Life isn't fair, sis. It's business. My father slid a document across the desk. We're prepared to buy out your shares. It's a generous offer, Emma. More than generous. I glanced at the number and felt sick. It was a fraction of what my 30% stake was worth, especially with the Roosevelt contract on the horizon. They knew it. I knew it. And they knew I knew it. Take some time to think about it. My mother finally spoke, her voice gentle but firm. Always the peacemaker, never the defender. I stood up, my legs unsteady. I don't need time. That night, I signed away my birthright with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. By morning, I was on a plane to Chicago, leaving behind everything I'd ever known in Harborview, Connecticut. David's text arrived just as we reached cruising altitude. Thanks for making this easy, Em. Don't worry, I'll take good care of our family legacy. I turned off my phone and leaned my head against the window, watching Harborview disappear beneath the clouds. I wouldn't cry. Not here, not now. Maybe not ever again. My first year in Chicago was a lesson in humility. Despite my MBA and years of experience at Callaway, I couldn't land a decent job in construction management. The moment potential employers contacted my references and spoke to my father or brother, opportunities mysteriously evaporated. By month 3, I was living in a studio apartment so small I could touch both walls if I stretched out my arms. I waited tables at a diner 6 nights a week and spent my days sending out resumes that went nowhere. The buyout money sat untouched in my bank account. Blood money. I refused to spend a penny of it. One night, as I was closing up the diner, a customer left a business card along with his tip. You're too smart to be waiting tables, he said. My firm needs a project assistant. It's entry-level, but it's a foot in the door. The card read, Marcus Chern, CFO, Lakeside Construction Management. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Marcus had been my father's right-hand man for 20 years before being mysteriously pushed out 6 months before my own ousting. I'd always liked him. He'd been the only executive who'd treated me like a future leader rather than the boss's daughter. The next morning, I called the number. I was wondering when you'd reach out, Marcus said when I identified myself. I've been keeping tabs on you since you left Harborview. How did you find me? Connecticut's construction world is small. Chicago's isn't much bigger. He paused. I know what David and your father did, Emma. Similar thing happened to me when I questioned some of David's creative accounting practices. I started at Lakeside the following Monday. The pay was terrible, the hours worse, but I was back in construction. I soaked up everything like a sponge, bidding processes, vendor management, client relations. I stayed late, came in early, volunteered for the projects no one else wanted. By the end of year 2, I was running my own projects. Marcus became my mentor, teaching me not just the business I thought I knew, but the business as it really operated, the politics, the relationships, the unwritten rules that my father and brother had never bothered to share with me. At the end of my 3rd year, Marcus made me an unexpected offer. I'm planning to retire next year. How would you feel about starting your own firm? I'd back you financially. Silent partner. No interference. 6 months later, Harbinger Construction Management opened its doors in downtown Chicago. 7 years passed in a blur of 18-hour days, working lunches and the slow, steady building of a reputation. I specialized in the same high-end commercial developments that had been Callaway's bread and butter, but with a focus on sustainability and innovative design that set us apart. I assembled a team of the best people in the industry, many of them women who'd been overlooked and underestimated just like me. By year 5, Harbinger was winning awards and landing major projects across the Midwest. By year 7, we'd expanded to Denver and Atlanta. I rarely thought about Callaway anymore. They operated primarily in the Northeast, and our paths seldom crossed. Until the day my assistant dropped a copy of Construction Weekly on my desk with a yellow sticky note. Thought you might find this interesting. The headline made my coffee turn bitter in my mouth. Callaway Construction selected as finalist for prestigious Roosevelt Development, Phase 2. The Roosevelt. Again. The first phase had established Callaway nationally. The second phase would cement their reputation for decades to come. A $500 million mixed-use development that would be the crown jewel of the Northeast market. I read the article 3 times, my heart hammering in my chest. David's quote made me laugh out loud in my empty office. Callaway Construction has the experience, the vision, and the family values that make us the obvious choice for Roosevelt Phase 2. We're not just building structures. We're building legacies. Family values.
Right.
I picked up my phone and called Marcus. Though retired, he remained my silent partner and occasional advisor. Marcus? It's time. He didn't need clarification. He'd been waiting for this moment as long as I had. The Roosevelt? Phase 2. Yes. Are you sure you're ready for this, Emma? Once you step back into their world, there's no going back to anonymity. I looked out my office window at the Chicago skyline, at everything I'd built on my own. I'm ready. Marcus sighed. Then I'll make the call. Hartford Holding is about to enter the bidding war. Hartford Holding was our shell company, named after the street I'd grown up on. No connection to me, no digital footprint that could be traced back to Harbinger or to Emma Callaway. Just a mysterious real estate investment firm with very deep pockets and an interest in the Roosevelt project. The next few weeks were a blur of preparation. We assembled a proposal that would make the Roosevelt Selection Committee salivate. Better pricing, better timeline, better sustainability metrics. Marcus reached out to his old industry contacts, greasing the wheels, ensuring our bid landed on the right desks. All the while, we watched Callaway Construction from afar. According to Marcus's sources, they were confident. Too confident. David had been whining and dining the Roosevelt executives for months, calling in favors, promising the moon. He thinks it's a done deal, Marcus reported. Word is, he's already started staffing up, ordering materials. Typical David, I murmured, always counting his wins before they're secured. 3 weeks after we submitted our bid, I got the call I'd been waiting for. Hartford Holding has been selected as a finalist alongside Callaway Construction, Marcus said, a smile in his voice. The final presentations are scheduled for next month in Harborview.
Harborview. My hometown.
The universe had a sense of humor after all. Have they figured out who's behind Hartford yet?
I asked. No.
They're going crazy trying to dig up information. David especially. He can't stand not knowing who his competition is. I smiled.
Good.
Let's keep it that way until the final reveal. The Roosevelt Committee had requested in-person presentations from both finalists. A chance to meet the teams, to look the company principals in the eye. It was perfect. I spent the next month preparing. I hired a stylist. I colored my hair back to its natural brown from the blonde I'd adopted in Chicago. I practiced my presentation until I could recite it in my sleep. I assembled a team of my best people, none of whom knew the full story, but all of whom understood the importance of this win. The week before the presentation, I received a call from Jennifer Harrigan, my father's longtime executive assistant. Emma, I heard Hartford Holding might be connected to you, she said cautiously. I wanted to warn you. David's desperate to find out who's behind it. He's hired investigators. He's trying to bribe committee members. Why would you tell me this, Jen? She hesitated. Because I was there when they pushed you out. I saw what happened. She lowered her voice. And Callaway isn't as financially stable as they appear. David's made some risky moves. The Roosevelt is do or die for them. After we hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, staring at the wall. I'd imagined this moment for years. Callaway vulnerable, David desperate. In my fantasies, it had felt sweeter, cleaner. In reality, it was complicated by the knowledge that it wasn't just David who would suffer, but everyone who worked for Callaway. The night before the presentation, I checked into the Harborview Grand Hotel under the name Emma Harper. I stood at the window of my room, looking out at the familiar skyline of my hometown. Somewhere out there, in his mansion on the hill, David was probably reviewing his notes, confident in his victory. My phone pinged with a text from Marcus. David's been asking questions about Hartford all week. Getting desperate. Heard he tried to bribe someone on the committee for information. Typical David. Always looking for shortcuts. I slept surprisingly well that night. The Roosevelt presentation was scheduled for 2 p.m. at the Harborview Convention Center. Callaway Construction would present first, followed immediately by Hartford Holding. I arrived early with my team, sequestered in a preparation room while David and his team took the stage. Through the door, I could hear snippets of his presentation. The same old Callaway talking points. Family tradition. Reliability. Deep roots in the community. I closed my eyes, centering myself. 10 years of work had led to this moment. At exactly 3:15 p.m., an assistant poked her head into our room. Hartford Holding? You're up. My team filed out ahead of me. I waited until the last moment, then followed them to the stage. The lights were bright, but not bright enough to obscure the familiar faces in the audience. The Roosevelt Committee in the front row. Behind them, looking confused and irritated, sat my brother David and his executive team. I stepped up to the podium. Good afternoon. My name is Emma Callaway, CEO of Harbinger Construction Management and principal investor in Hartford Holding. The room went silent. Then, a murmur spread through the audience like wildfire. In the third row, David's face drained of color. Next to him, his VP of Operations whispered something urgently in his ear. I smiled and continued. While the Callaway name might sound familiar to many of you, Harbinger Construction represents a new approach to development. I delivered my presentation flawlessly, outlining our superior proposal point by point. Better pricing, more innovative design, stronger sustainability credentials, a more experienced project team. All the while, I could feel David's eyes boring into me, his expression shifting from shock to anger to panic. When I finished, the committee applauded. The chairman stood up. Thank you, Ms. Callaway. This is unexpected. We were unaware of your connection to Callaway Construction. Former connection. I corrected smoothly. I haven't been associated with Callaway for 10 years. From the corner of my eye, I saw David stand up abruptly and stride toward the exit, phone already pressed to his ear. The chairman nodded. Well, we'll certainly have questions about that. But first, your proposal has some very impressive metrics. Can you walk us through your cost analysis in more detail? For the next 30 minutes, I answered their questions with the confidence that comes from absolute preparation and absolute certainty. My team backed me up beautifully, presenting data, testimonials, and case studies from our previous projects. By the time we wrapped up, the energy in the room had shifted palpably. The committee members were leaning forward, engaged. They were selling themselves to us now, not the other way around. As we gathered our materials, the chairman approached me privately. Ms. Callaway, I have to ask, given the family connection, is there any potential conflict of interest we should be concerned about? I met his gaze steadily. Mr. Diaz, 10 years ago, Callaway Construction determined I wasn't qualified to contribute to the family business. I've spent the decade since building my own company, on my own terms with my own team. There's no conflict, just competition. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Fair enough. The committee will make its decision by the end of the week. As my team and I exited the presentation room, I wasn't surprised to find David waiting in the hallway, face flushed with anger. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he hissed, stepping directly into my path. My team paused uncertainly behind me. I turned to them. "I'll meet you at the hotel. This won't take long." After they left, I faced my brother.
"Hello, David."
"It's been a while." "This is a new low, even for you," he spat, using our family name to try to steal our contract. I raised an eyebrow. "Our family name? I thought I wasn't cut out for the family business." "Isn't that what you told Mom and Dad?" He ran a hand through his hair, the same nervous gesture he'd had since childhood. "This is ridiculous. You can't seriously think you're going to win the Roosevelt. The committee knows Callaway. They trust us." They trusted the Callaway they thought they knew. I agreed. But now they've seen what Harbinger can offer. Better terms, better design, better management. "It's just business, David. Isn't that what you always told me?" His eyes narrowed. "What's your game here, Emma? Is this some kind of revenge fantasy? You want to hurt the family business just to get back at me?" "I'm not interested in hurting anyone. I'm interested in winning the Roosevelt contract because it's a good business decision for my company. The fact that it happens to be against Callaway is, let's call it an interesting coincidence."
He scoffed.
"Coincidence? You deliberately hid behind Hartford Holding. You knew exactly what you were doing." I shrugged. "I learned from the best. You always said I didn't understand business." The barb hit its mark. David flinched, then recovered quickly. "Dad's going to be furious when he hears about this." It was the reaction I'd expected, but it still stung. Not concern for me, not curiosity about my success, just worry about what our father would think. "Dad retired 5 years ago, according to the press releases. This is your show now, David. Your responsibility." I checked my watch. "And right now my responsibility is to my team." "Excuse me." I moved to step around him, but he grabbed my arm. "This isn't over, Emma. The Roosevelt is ours. I've worked too hard for this." I looked pointedly at his hand until he released me. "May the best company win." As I walked away, he called after me, his voice echoing in the empty hallway. "You know this will kill Dad if Callaway goes under. His heart isn't strong anymore." I kept walking. "Low blow, David. Even for you." Back at the hotel, my team was celebrating in the lounge. They sensed we'd done well, even if they didn't fully understand the personal stakes. I ordered champagne for everyone, making the appropriate toast about teamwork and excellence, but my mind was elsewhere. 3 days later, I was back in my Chicago office when I received the email from the Roosevelt Committee. I read it twice, then called Marcus. "We got it," I said simply when he answered. His whoop of joy made me hold the phone away from my ear. "I never doubted it for a second, Emma. Not for 1 second." "There's more," I said. "They want to talk about expanding the scope. Additional buildings in Phase 2. Marcus whistled. "That would take the contract value to what, $700 million? "At least." I swiveled in my chair to face the window. "They're announcing it tomorrow. How do you feel?" I considered the question. Validated. Not vengeful? Not smug. I laughed. Maybe a little smug, but mostly free. The announcement hit the industry news the next morning. My phone immediately lit up with congratulatory messages from colleagues and clients. And then, an unexpected name appeared on my screen, Mom. I stared at the phone for several rings before answering. "Hello, Mom." "Emma." Her voice sounded older, more tired than I remembered. "I just heard the news. Yes, Harbinger won the Roosevelt contract. It's a big opportunity for us." A pause. "David is devastated. The company was counting on this deal." Of course. She was calling about David, not to congratulate me. "Callaway will survive," I said flatly. "From what I hear, the company's financials are still strong." "Not as strong as they appear," she said quietly. "There have been problems. David made some investments that didn't pan out. The Roosevelt was supposed to be the solution." I closed my eyes. Part of me, a small, mean part that I wasn't proud of, felt a flicker of satisfaction. But mostly I felt tired. Tired of the drama, tired of the family dynamics that never seemed to change. I'm sorry to hear that, I said and meant it, but it's not my responsibility to fix David's mistakes. No, it's not, she agreed, surprising me. Emma, I owe you an apology. We all do. I wasn't prepared for that. In all my imagined scenarios of this moment, my mother apologizing had never featured. It's been 10 years, Mom. I know. 10 years too long. She sighed heavily. When we saw your name in the announcement, well, your father and I realized what we'd lost. Not just your contribution to the company, but you, Emma. We lost you. I said nothing. What was there to say? Your father wants to see you. He's been following your career, you know, clipping articles about Harbinger's projects. He has a whole folder. Something twisted in my chest. He was the one who said I wasn't cut out for the business. He was wrong, she said simply. We were all wrong, and too proud to admit it. We spoke for a few more minutes, awkward pleasantries that felt like placeholders for deeper conversations we weren't ready to have yet. When I hung up, I felt drained but somehow lighter. That evening, as I was leaving the office, my assistant handed me a thick envelope that had been couriered over. It's from Callaway Construction, she said. Inside was a formal letter from David, offering to buy Hartford Holding for a staggering sum, far more than the company was worth, even with the Roosevelt contract. Attached was a personal note. Just name your price, Emma. Whatever it takes. I tore both into tiny pieces and dropped them in the trash. The next morning, I received another text from my mother. Your father had a minor heart episode last night. He's okay, but asking for you. I stared at the message for a long time. Was this manipulation or truth? With my family, the line had always been blurry. In the end, I booked a flight to Harborview for the weekend. Not because I owed them anything, but because I owed it to myself to close this chapter properly. On my terms. 3 days later, I sat across from my father in his study. He looked older, frilier than I remembered. I was wrong, he said simply. About everything. David joined us, uncharacteristically subdued. We'd like to propose a merger. Harbinger and Callaway. I studied them both. After all these years, they still didn't get it. This wasn't about business anymore.
It was about respect.
No merger, I said firmly. But I'll consider acquiring Callaway's client contracts and bringing on staff who want to make the transition. You dissolve the Callaway name? My father asked, his voice hollow. The Callaway name stopped meaning something to me 10 years ago, Dad. My mother appeared in the doorway. Emma, please. This is your father's legacy. I met her gaze. And Harbinger is mine. I built it without the Callaway name, without Callaway connections, without Callaway money. I'm not giving that up, not even for family. By the time I left that evening, we had the outline of a deal. Callaway would be absorbed into Harbinger, its name preserved only as a small division handling legacy clients. My father would serve as a consultant during the transition. David would receive a modest payout and sign a non-compete agreement. As I walked to my rental car, David followed me out. I really am sorry, Emma, he said, hands shoved deep in his pockets. For what it's worth. I studied him in the porch light, trying to see the brother I'd once adored before ambition and jealousy had twisted him. It's worth something, I admitted. Not enough, but something. I guess I never really understood business after all, he said with a bitter laugh. Not the way you do. I unlocked my car. You understood taking. I understood building. That was always the difference. 2 months later, back in my Chicago office, I signed the final papers completing Harbinger's acquisition of Callaway Construction. My assistant brought in champagne for my executive team as we toasted the new era. That evening, after everyone had gone, I sat alone in my office, looking out at the Chicago skyline. On my desk was a small pink hard hat, sent by my father with a note, for your future daughter, should you have one. So she'll never doubt she belongs. I ran my fingers over the smooth plastic, thinking about legacy, about family, about the choices that shape our lives. 10 years ago, I'd been pushed out of a business I thought I needed. In the process, I'd found the strength to build something better. I picked up my phone and called my mother. Is Dad free for dinner when I'm in Harborview next week for the Roosevelt groundbreaking? Her intake of breath was audible. He'd love that, Emma. We both would. Just Dad, I said gently but firmly. We'll start there. One step at a time. On my terms. The way I built my business, the way I would rebuild or not my relationship with my family. I hung up and looked again at the tiny pink hard hat. Then I placed it on my bookshelf, not as a reminder of what I'd lost, but of what I'd gained. The knowledge that I didn't need anyone's approval to succeed. The confidence to build something entirely my own. And the satisfaction of proving, once and for all, that I understood business just fine.